Well, I guess I'll just launch right in, and I'll start with Kelly. Kelly, why do you think headless adoption has been higher thus far in Europe versus in the United States and Canada?
I think the first is that we at commercetools invented headless commerce and we're really big and first to market with it. I know a lot of people were kind of dabbling with it, which is great, but we were the first to, and this wasn't even that long ago, 2 years, 2.5 years ago, that we really started to get those big deals. And we're a German headquartered company, and we started selling in Germany and then kind of spread out from there across Western Europe, and then finally made the jump to the US. So part of it's just where it started. The other thing I found is that in Europe, the countries are all their own markets. So it would be the equivalent of having e-commerce in the state of Texas only, or e-commerce in the state of Illinois, population wise.
Mhm.
And as a result, the GMV of these shops tends to be smaller. And when there's less GMV on the line, I think folks are more willing to take risks versus in the US, if you've got a $2 billion GMV business live, you're not going to mess with that. That's a big chunk of revenue coming in. And headless commerce was new. I think it's now the default, but a couple of years ago, that was still a relatively unknown thing. And as a result, folks just didn't necessarily want to take the risk in such a big market. But if you're in Sweden, go for it. Small market. Move
Yeah,
faster.
hedging your bets, so to speak. Well, Patrick, I guess I'd lead into you with that. Comparing the EU, where again Vue started, and the US, what are your thoughts in terms of the different marketplace viewpoints?
Yeah, so I do think Kelly pointed a very valid point that like the first precursors of headless were in Europe, right? And it does take time. And the bigger the company is, the bigger the hesitation. And usually how it works, I call it the domino effect, right? Once you land a couple of big accounts in a certain market, the others will follow. And for the US companies to make such the decision, it doesn't matter if you have the European logo in your portfolio, as long as they are not a global company, right? So it does take time. And another thing that I think has an influence is the cost of the developers, because in Europe you do have countries like Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, where the rates for devs are a bit lower. And on the beginning, going headless did require a lot of development work. It is changing right now. Like with solutions like ours, we make it much easier, much more efficient. But I think it also probably had a lot of impact. Plus, I see that, for example, open source adoption and in general, tech-driven companies are making those decisions a little bit faster here in Europe, and they are not that afraid of using new tech compared to the US, right? So I think US needs this maturity when you look at the different product life cycles, like the early innovators and so on. Like this is what we see in Europe, and then US follows when it's more secure to pick.
Thank you. Well, I guess I'd kind of tail that into with to Brian. I'm going to kind of ask you a combination. You're really pioneering customer experience and commerce experience, and why isn't the superior functionality in terms of enabling that commerce experience by headless, that message that's resonated effectively in Europe, why isn't that resonating as much here in the US thus far?
I actually let me back up and then I'll go forward. So I kind of want to, in a sense,
Please.
frame a little bit on the first question you asked, Kelly and Patrick. I think there's no question that headless did, in a sense, kind of start and gain early momentum in the European market. But I think there's sort of three key factors that I would identify that kind of explain why the North American market is lagging kind of in this way. One is who the buyer is. I think it's more likely to find in Europe that it is a technology-led sort of decision around the commerce technology solution set. And in North America, it's more likely that it's going to be led by a business leader. Now, they're going to have obviously technologists working alongside them. They may have consultants working alongside them in that process, but often it's going to be led by a business leader. Now, it's not binary. It's not like always one or the other, but it's really about tendencies. And in North America, you're more likely to see a business leader. And in Europe, it's more common. You're going to see a technology leader kind of driving the decision. And so Headless fundamentally still today resonates with the technology teams because it's giving them a powerful set of tools to innovate and express, right, their capability. And I think another key point is it's hard for the business to understand the ROI of these kinds of investments or the possibilities from a business perspective connected today to Headless. And I know this group is probably all working on that with clients all the time. But I'd say, again, to generalize, in North America, the business leaders who are often driving these decisions have a hard time grokking the ROI connected with an underlying sort of technology evolution. They're going to be more focused on very specific capabilities and problems and ROI-driven, investments that they're going to make. And so it's more incremental. And then I think Kelly touched on this earlier, and it's about risk. In North America, you are going to see, much more mature businesses operating at scale because of the size of the market and because of the kind of the length of time they've been doing it. And, risk is, a great inhibitor if I'm looking, and also lots of experience with replatforming projects that took a lot longer, cost a lot more than expected, and potentially didn't deliver a lift in the same way that they expected when they built their business case. So a lot of these business leaders, for example, might be on their third or fourth replatforming project in their career when you bring this topic up and they're like, I don't know. It's just not necessarily in my priorities because it's not connected to some business outcome that I'm looking to achieve. That, again, it's not universal. You're going to find exceptions. You're going to find business leaders who are all in on this. But I'd say if we're talking about generalities and trying to map like why, North America tends to lag Europe, I really think those three key factors, how they play out in the different markets is a key reason. That's changing and it will evolve, and it may take more time than we originally thought when Headless really started to gain momentum, and it may end up being a very similar kind of landscape in North America, but I think those are inhibitors in a sense that you don't necessarily see playing out in Europe. And then to your other question, Darrell, I think actually in North America there's not a difference in terms of how business leaders look at the commerce experience, but they may be looking to do it in a little different way. And certainly there is an opportunity to bring in solutions on top of legacy platforms. And there's also an opportunity to bring in point solutions. And so, it may just be that they're not looking at how to accomplish those things as a fundamental re-architecture and re-platforming. But I think the interest level in unlocking, omni-channel digital experiences, future-proofing, how you can, play ball in emerging experiences. And then, by the way, I think that's growing in momentum as we talk about AR and VR and virtual worlds and so on. Once again, there's going to be a impetus, for businesses to say, well, how am I going to do that in a scalable, sustainable way once I get past my initial experiments, They're going to have to invest in an API first strategy ultimately, but they may be looking to try to accomplish it in more of an evolutionary way. And we see that play out with a lot of clients we work with who are in a sense trying to take the lid off, their existing commerce technology investments that they've spent a lot of money on integration, their business processes are wrapped around, et cetera, but they're interested in innovating on the commerce experience. And then, of course, we see others who are going to say, actually, a fundamental re-architecture is the right decision. So I think, that's, I guess, how I see that. I don't think there's really a difference in the importance of it.
Mhm.
but how they implement that strategy differs.
Okay.
Again, a generalization, but
Well, see, I appreciate that. Now, Jason, when you talk about replatforming nightmares, I think you've probably seen a couple of those, heard a couple of those objections, and I guess when we talk about headless, it's essentially modularity and being able to replace or graft onto existing platforms better functionality across data, across customer experience, across user experience. How do you think vendors can better position headless solutions in the market in the United States using those examples they have in Europe?
Great question. And I think there's two things that come to mind for me that when I talk with clients, right? It's confusion and consensus. Those two elements tend to create challenges for them. So one, on the confusion side, they're not really sure what and how to go about creating this headless architecture, which is why I think some things like the MACH Alliance that Kelly's part of can be really helpful to educate the marketplace, and then involving SIs that can provide that education and really help guide organizations through what that transformation could and should look like, right? Creating some of the best practices that can make for assured adoption. And that's one area. And then consensus. When I have conversations, and even about customer data platforms, right? Who's going to own it? Well, marketing wants to. Well, so does the commerce team, and so does IT, because they care about all of the important privacy laws that need to be adhered to, right? And so where's that data going to be consumed? So when you think about the modularity element and what we're trying to accomplish with headless, being able to educate organizations, and if we're standing up an organization today that was going to go sell a headless solution, I'd be thinking about one, we got to educate a lot of people on what the value is and how to go about it. So we've got to have smart, intelligent, consultative people in-house to do that. And then on the sales side, you really have to have that consultative seller that can listen, understand, what are the use cases they need to execute against, and then start to, architect in a, unique way for these clients, how they can go about creating an architecture that's going to allow them to create the experiences they want to, regardless of whether it's a service interaction that's involving perhaps a little bit of commerce, or if it's purely just marketing connectivity, trying to get people bought into the brand. So those are the couple things that I see and I would recommend.
Well, Kelly, I think I'm going to come back to you on this. When I look at the vast majority of the headless solutions that I've interacted with, the risk profile for implementing them is, well, I'm not going to say negligible. There's never a negligible risk when you're changing a fundamental part of your commerce stack. But given the low-code nature of a lot of the applications that are out there, how it seems like the Europeans seem to have grokked that a bit more quickly than their counterparts here in the US. How do you think that message needs to be translated, for lack of a better term?
Well, with commercetools specifically, and I think some of the other commerce platforms are getting to this point, there's the complexities on the outside of the platform. It's not on the inside, right? And that's a fundamental trade-off of microservices, is you're trading inner complexity for outer. And what I mean by that is with SAP Hybris, with Salesforce Commerce Cloud, with Oracle ATG, with all those first generation solutions, you had to be an expert in that application and how it worked. And there's nothing wrong with that. It was just how things were done back then. So to change how you log some data, for example, right? These applications did logging in a very explicit prescriptive way. You want to make a customization to Salesforce Commerce Cloud, you have to use their specific weird orphaned JavaScript engine circa 2006. It's a very opinionated proprietary way of doing it, which is why a lot of those developers and architects who work with those products make so much money, because there just aren't that many of them. And these commerce platforms are literally 10, 15, 20 million lines of code. So it's almost like being a brain surgeon. You have to know exactly where to go in that monolithic application to make that change. These newer style platforms were all API based. And for better or worse, that means that the complexity is on the outside, it's on the consumption of the APIs. But what it means is that the folks who can consume and work with these new commerce offerings are a lot different in profile. Rather than being a really deep Magento architect, you now can have people who interact with APIs, GraphQL, cloud functions, events, really widely available, well-known skills. So it pretty dramatically increases the folks who can work on it. And I don't think that message has quite permeated the US market yet.
The ease of use, the ease of implementation, the time frames that I've seen for going live on these solutions is, a percentage of the legacy products that they're replacing or augmenting in many cases. Well, I guess the last thing I kind of want to go in here, because I do want to be respectful of everyone's time, is localization. Localization is certainly on a lot of digital leaders' minds, right alongside personalization, and how much localization is the U.S. market really able to experience today with the legacy solutions, and how much more benefit would they get from using headless solutions and driving that localization?
Maybe I'll take this one. There are differences between the markets.
Mhm.
What we at commercetools like to say is, and actually I said this so much that some guys in Europe printed t-shirts with this on it, is we don't do that. Because that's all I've said for years is we don't do that. And I think the legacy approach was to say, yeah, we'll do that. We can make that work. And what we regularly say now is, look, if our promotion engine doesn't meet your needs, don't use it. We'd be very happy to introduce you to Voucherify or Talon One. If you want your own loyalty system, use it. If you want to build your own pricing, go for it, right? That's the world of composable commerce. Is you're not forced to use the thing that comes in the box. You can go build or buy your own that's much more adapted to your solution. And we saw that when we crossed from the US, from Europe into the US, a lot of people said, hey, cool product, but we hate your promotions engine. You guys don't understand American style promotions, which I get, because we had Germans being product managers for American style discounts and it just didn't work. So, that's an example of where you have to localize for the market, but with this new composable approach, you can absolutely do that.
I'd also say that, for a lot of, businesses, localization used to mean like completely separate instances, right, of the commerce stack, right? You're going to basically re-implement, and they would try to templatize, right? An implementation of Hybris or an implementation of Magento and so on. And of course, there's a lot of this out there in the market today. And I think that is largely untenable. It's very difficult to keep all of those different sites kind of up to the same standard. And, whether it's, security patches or innovation you're doing becomes very, very untenable. And I think, with a headless architecture, right, it does offer you an opportunity to really simplify how you manage, right, many multiple sites and drive localization, whether it's a feature capability like Kelly was talking about, or the commerce experience you're trying to drive. So there's definitely an opportunity there to use these kind of tool sets when you're thinking about expanding globally. And that, in fact, may be where you really want to start down this kind of path. If you are a large, let's say, US-based business and thinking about, headless, this may be the best place to actually start that journey as well. So it's something else I think headless technology providers can also kind of utilize within this market when they're talking to large global US-based businesses.
Well, when we look at the U.S., I think coming into the U.S. from Europe, there's there's often a tendency to see the United States as a homogeneous entity, when in fact it's quite heterogeneous. I mean, we've got multiple languages, we've got multiple regions. I'm interested and perhaps Patrick, you can speak to this. Have you seen United States digital leaders that are excited about the use cases for that regionality or that localization with headless?
Well, it really depends on the size of the company, right? Because the bigger the company, the bigger the needs, especially many of them do go outside US as well. But there was also always a question about the multi-storefront capabilities, right? How can we sell through specific channels? How can we set our promotions and pricing being different for people living in a certain state? So this is definitely part of the questions, and we see that, you know, with the current monolith setup, it does become an issue, because Kelly brought this up, right? You need to have a person that is specialized in this very, very specific tech stack. And those guys, you know, are, I call it dinosaurs, right? Like, it's not many of them left on the market, because all of the young developers, they don't want to touch it, right? And the demand for developers are growing globally. So yes, the demand for that is there, and I think all of the new solutions coming up on the market are basically targeting just that, right? Like, you have companies that are doing promotions only. Like, our company does storefront only. And when someone from business comes to us and say, hey, like, can we talk about like promotions? Can we talk about the, you know, content changes and publishing and scheduling? I'm like, well, no, because we are a dev tool and we're gonna talk to your developers, and then I can introduce you to our partner, you know, Bloomreach, that will take care of your amazing marketing and business people, because that's how it works in Headless. And because we all specialize, we will help consume all those APIs, right? But your developers should be the ones speaking to us. So I think, you know, it really requires a lot of education still, but I think with each additional month, we are getting closer and closer, and people do realize that it's just gonna become easier for them to manage.
Wow, thank you. Well, for those of you viewing this, we actually do have time for some Q&A. And there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you haven't had a chance to ask a question and you'd like to, please feel free to. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep asking questions. And you really don't want that to happen. The only other question that I had for our organization, for our panel is, you know, a lot of things right now are still offline, like price comparison tools for utilities, and they've been a lot slower to take off. How can sales work better with marketing to help educate those less informed buyers?
Well, I think those are two questions. So first, offline, we are seeing our customers increasingly use us as the point of sale. Historically, you had these physical stores, they had their own everything, their own inventory, their own product catalog, pricing, availability, all those things. And then you had digital commerce, where everything else was. And I get back in the day when internet connections were pretty spotty, commerce platforms were pretty immature. I understand why it evolved that way, but I think it's disingenuous for organizations to say that they're omnichannel when they have these two completely siloed systems. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Now what they're saying is, we have so much technology in every single store, whether it's fraud, credit card readers, security systems, smart tags. We have 1,000 things in a store that require an internet connection. If the connection and connections to stores these days are redundant and very reliable, if there's a problem that both of my connections to a physical store are dead, that probably means there's a tornado bearing down on the store. Like, people aren't going to be shopping if you lose internet connections. So what we're starting to see now is, why have multiple channels, multiple everything? Just have your commerce APIs, expose that data and functionality up, And then you can build a point of sale system from off the shelf, commercially available tablets and other physical devices and just start consuming it. Makes perfect sense.
I think that, I often call those offline channels digitally enabled channels. And the point is, right, the customer, sales associate, the contact center associate, they're using digital tools as well. And so, this idea of like expression of your commerce platform into all those environments, I think is absolutely the logical step. And that's where we can start to really deliver better, improved omni-channel experiences. A lot of businesses are trying to pull those elements together. The challenge is, like, if you take POS, for example, there's so many capabilities that have been packed in. And Jason, you, with your experience at Tulip and so forth, I have a lot of firsthand experience with that. But there's so many things that have been packed into that POS besides checking someone out, that's like the barrier. So it's like decomposition as well into like discrete services that businesses can use to build out those digitally enabled channels like contact centers, stores, et cetera, or field service people, et cetera. And, at Bloomreach, we have lots of customers who are using our search and product discovery and product recommendation and personalization tools in those same kinds of ways as well. But it's still, there's some big barriers for that kind of transformation to really take place. And I think it's like the ecosystem also has to evolve around those quote unquote offline channels to help businesses make that leap fundamentally.
And do you see Headless as really driving that primarily, or driving that more effectively?
I think Headless is I wouldn't say driving it. I would say Headless is the direction you're going to see the answer. Let's just call it, API first, discrete capabilities that are delivered headless. That's the answer that I think things are going to move toward, whether they're building your own services or you're using commercially available services. But I don't know that it's the driver. I think what's really the driver is a better customer experience and the ability to personalize the experience for every customer across every touch point, know them, et cetera, which is grounded obviously in customer intelligence and customer data fundamentally, but then being able to serve them more effectively as we as consumers, or B2B buyers for that matter, we're switching channels constantly. So businesses feel the pain within the experiences they're able to deliver, and the answer is going to come from this approach, right? So I wouldn't say Headless is driving it. I'd say Headless should be there to catch it.
Fantastic.
Darrell, I was just gonna add real quick. So to answer your second question around sales and marketing alignment. So really 3 things I'm doing to help the organization. Right. One is, make sure we've got really a library of use cases that customers are trying to execute against, regardless of whether it's, commerce, marketing, service, et cetera. Right. So what are those use cases that they're struggling to enable that, really do represent omni-channel customer experiences? Secondly, what's our solution to that, right? How are we helping organizations accomplish that and publishing those use cases out to the organizations? And then, third, webinars like this. I think, if more organizations are doing more webinars like this, that would really help to educate those buyers out there that are thinking about, how do we transform, how do we build consensus in our organizations to get the alignment across the, autonomous operating business groups that we have, so that we can break down those barriers and really begin to create those compelling customer experiences.
Well, I think that, that leads us to, I guess, our the big question, which comes from Rob, for each of you. If you were going to relay one key message to a business leader who's not familiar with headless e-commerce in the US, what would it be? And I guess we could start with Patrick.
Yeah, so what I like to repeat quite a lot, and I realize that it really speaks to people, like I'm saying that Headless is making both the techies and the business people happy, because the techies, they will get amazing tech to work with, and the business people, they can pick the best products they want to work with, and everyone is happy. So if Rob has problems and he sees the tension between tech and business arguing a lot about the things that can be done, that cannot be done, that the deadline is way too long and he wants to have it in like 4 weeks, and techies say no, because the tech stack is not as good, we need like 4 months. Like that's probably what I would underline. That's what Headless is gonna give you, like making life of the people involved in your company much, much better.
Excellent. What would you add to that, Kelly?
I would never use the term headless. It's a terrible term on so many levels.
Oh.
It's a very nerdy technical term. It doesn't mean anything to business. It sounds terrible. I've given Dirk a lot of grief over the years about having coined that term because it's such a terrible term. And he retorts that I'm a developer, I'm not a marketer. So I guess that's fair. But I would talk about innovation requiring iteration. And in many cases, it takes 3, 4, 5 iterations of a feature to start generating any revenue from that feature. And with a real headless commerce platform, you can iterate on any one of those APIs independently. Maybe today you update your pricing logic, or maybe you update your promotion engine to support a specific type of promotion. There are these things that you can update independently. And if you can update these things every hour, maybe it takes you a week to get some feedback from the market and perfect that feature. If you're releasing once a quarter, it could take you a year. It's ridiculous. And Amazon's releasing once a second. A lot of the other digitally native companies are. So I would turn it around more to how fast can you innovate, as opposed to what is the technology used to consume APIs.
Great. Brian, what would you add to that? What's your message? Using
what I would add
non-offensive term, non-offensive terms only.
Yeah. What I would add to that is unlocking the art of the possible. So connected to innovation and iteration, connected to making the business and technology organization work more effectively together, as Patrick shared. But it's unlocking the art of the possible to differentiate and to experiment. And as we sort of enter into this next era with other emerging digital touch points, some of which we don't really know exactly what the impact will be on commerce. If you have the capability already by having all these APIs available to you to then integrate into these new emerging experiences at low cost, at low risk, you're going to be more likely to unlock something that is a true innovation and differentiator for your business. And likewise, your business is unique fundamentally in some way, whether it's your brand and the lifestyle you represent or the products and the capabilities, it is unique. And today you're living probably within a pretty standardized box. Long-term, whether it's your customer journeys, omni-channel, et cetera, how you want to serve a customer, how you want to serve them in their home, how do you want to integrate these commerce and marketing capabilities into your products themselves, right? This is about unlocking that. And you're going to end up paying for it one way or the other. In a sense, it's also about, do you want to pay for it up front and then have a much more efficient capability to experiment and innovate and capitalize on that later? Or are you going to continue to pay for it long term with heavyweight sort of resource intensive projects and slow time to market, and probably a lot of consultants. So you know what I mean?
That don't necessarily exist anymore. But hey, we can always invent them. We can always invent them. Well, Jason, this one's for the T-shirt. What's your pitch? How do we explain API first technology to the non-familiar buyer?
You don't use the term at all. Especially to business leaders, but in all seriousness, I think what everybody said before me carries great weight and great insight. I always like to have a conversation that starts with forgetting technology, right? If you take that out of the picture and you think about what you're trying to accomplish for your customer, and you really have a customer-centric approach, let's talk about what that experience for a customer would look like, right? Would it be on a mobile device? Would it be a desktop? Would it be, a service call? Would it be an in-person store experience? Whatever it may be, right? A tweet I mean, there's all sorts of ways to connect to customers. So if you think about what that journey could and should look like, then you walk back into, okay, so let's talk about how we can enable that for you. So I would probably not use the term headless at all, especially with business. May not even use API, but I would really start the conversation with their use cases, what they're trying to accomplish, and keep them focused on it. Because the reality is, right, over the next decade, there's going to be a massive migration in North America of organizations that have made these, major investments in, different commerce platforms and technologies, content management systems, et cetera, into, a headless environment, because they're going to have to, right? There's resource constraints, right? Today, every company I talk to is struggling to find, the right developers. I think, Patrick, you said that, right? They don't want to touch ATG. They don't want to touch, the Hybris platform, right? So they want to, do something with React or something else like that, right? So that would be my t-shirt winning pitch, right? So tell me what you want to accomplish, and let's talk about those use cases and how we can execute those for you.
It's going to be a big t-shirt. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you very, very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Having this much brain power in one screen is somewhat overwhelming, but we managed to fit it in. And I'm looking forward to the future. And Headless is, changing every single day and growing. And I appreciate your sharing your wisdom today, and look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thank
Thanks
you,
a
Darrell.
lot. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.